Okay. Today's question is, what is one belief that you hold that you cannot fully justify, and why do you hold on to it? What I think is kind of interesting about this question, as it relates to my own philosophical attitude, is that I really don't believe that any of my beliefs are fully justified in the strict sense. I think that philosophy exists to get as far as possible towards assumptionlessness, as far as possible towards total justification, meaning that you could justify your ideas or the things that you commit to or the things that you act upon as far as you can. Or the idea would be that you would do so. The idea would be that you would do so in the ideal. And that is that the purpose of philosophy is to try to justify things as far as you can down into its foundations, so that it is all the way justified from the ground up. But philosophy doesn't really achieve that. It's difficult to achieve total justification. It's not actually impossible. And at least I can't be certain myself whether or not I've actually ever gotten to total justification. And I think that's part of the difficulty, is that you can't be certain about whether you've gotten there. I mean, even if you have, how are you going to objectively verify? How are you going to know with absolute 100% certainty that some kind of new information, some kind of new premise, some kind of new idea isn't just going to come up, the next moment or the next day to contradict what it is that you're talking about? At the very least, you have to kind of have this functional openness to being wrong, even about those things that you are most certain about. And so, not in a sense to sidestep the question, but I really don't think that any of my beliefs, at least as far as I can tell, have reached total justification. I think that oftentimes what you have to do is you have to use your mind to come to the best conclusion that you can, and then act from that premise within the given moment, right? And that takes a bit of internal investigation or internal negotiation. But what philosophy is supposed to do is to lead you to action. It's supposed to lead you to praxis. But for the sake of better action, for the sake of a better life, really. And because you can spend an infinite amount of time thinking about, the given truth of whatever idea that you have, because you can spend an infinite time doing that, you can spend your whole life doing that. At some point, you have to make a call and say, well, according to the best beliefs, according to the best knowledge that I have, this is what I'm going to do. You can't sort of wait on absolute knowledge, because you're never going to get it. You can't wait on total justification to come to a conclusion, because you're never going to get it. There's that certain functional aspect to knowledge that needs to be taken into consideration. That being said, I guess I'm trying to think here of something that I believe that I haven't really tried to fully justify. The tricky part about, being a person who thinks about this kind of stuff all the time is that you've gone pretty far in trying to justify your ideas, or at least you've gone farther than perhaps most of the people around you in a lot of ways. I mean, the obvious one might be faith. The obvious one might be well, the obvious one might be my faith in God, but I don't try to actively justify that, because the knowledge which I've gotten from God through revelation is a different kind of knowledge than rational knowledge. It's not something which truthfully requires justification. It's not something where I guess it matters to me whether it's rationally justified or not, like whether it has an empirical or logical coherence or proof to it or not. I believe in it based on faith, not based on reason. So in that sense, that belief not being fully justified is kind of part of the purpose or part of the structure of faith, is that faith is irrational. Faith does not really submit itself to reason. I would say that perhaps the main three things that I've talked about on this channel when it comes to peaceful parenting, anarchism, and authenticity, these are the reason I talk about them is because they are perhaps the three things that I've thought about the most and are the most important to me, and that I've poured the most time into, in a sense. So, and I've put them up against the common objections and some more sophisticated objections that I've run into, though I would say people haven't put a lot of time into thorough criticism of anarchism. There's a lot of assumption that goes on there. I would say perhaps my metaphysical outlook is one of those ones where I could see there being multiple objections to it, but I haven't really conceived of a more coherent understanding of the world that fits in with the rest of my philosophy. So there's a sense in which my metaphysical theory, I keep it because of its explanatory power, because it seems to explain more things, but not necessarily because I can justify it entirely. And it's really, I don't know if, I don't know how much time I have really to actually explain the metaphysics, but it's sort of akin to naive realism. It's sort of akin to this idea that what Kant called the categories of the mind are actually inescapable categories of being, and that the reason why we don't experience them like we do other empirical facts is because they're sort of ubiquitous to our experience. And so we haven't really developed a part of the mind. We haven't developed a need to differentiate them from the rest of the phenomena that we experience because they exist in a ubiquitous way. So, being, time, identity, causality, existence, these are categories of being that are inescapable and ubiquitous to existence. Therefore, the mind doesn't need a capacity for distinguishing, whereas, particularly when it comes to the senses, what the mind is doing is attempting to distinguish different sensations from one another. And when it comes to logic, again, we're talking about, I guess, the possibilities of the modes of being that distinguish from one another. And I don't know, I haven't had a lot of experience talking about it, and I'm sure there are plenty of good objections. I mean, I'm sort of coming up against Kant in that sense, where I'm not saying that the categories that he was talking about, the categories that there's no, in my philosophy, in my metaphysics, there is no phenomena and noumena, but it's not that I'm just saying that there is only the phenomena. I'm saying that the categories of being are as existent as our experience of our sense experience of the world, but they are not categories of the mind like Kant posited. It's not like we don't interpret the world through the categories of the mind. The categories are the inescapable categories of existence themselves that don't show up in the way that logic or sense experience does because of their ubiquitous nature. Now, there's plenty of things that you could point out that are missing with that, or there are plenty of problems you could bring up against that, right? And that's because the metaphysical idea is relatively underdeveloped. That metaphysical picture helps to explain kind of how I'm viewing the world, especially the selective aspects of the mind that give rise to our phenomenal experience of the world and our individual experience of the world. So there's a sense in which the epistemology is much more developed, and then the metaphysics gets developed. The metaphysics and ontology gets developed as sort of a back-end support to the epistemology. But the metaphysics itself, I really almost disregard, or the part of the method of my philosophical approach is I only approach metaphysical questions insofar as they become necessary for higher order questions like like ethics. So I'm not really trying to explore the whole of metaphysical problems and build up. Rather, I'm starting in ethics. I'm seeing some issues that I have to go down the chain to justify. That leads me to the ethics or to the metaphysics that I've just explained, and then I kind of go back up the chain. So I don't spend very much time in the depths, so to speak. I spend much more time in the applied philosophy, and part of that is because you can lean on the metaphysical assumptions and the epistemological assumptions that people make on a day-to-day basis to talk about those points. Unless you're talking with a philosopher, you don't need to get into a great deal of metaphysics and epistemology to talk about anarchism and peaceful parenting and authenticity. These are things that you can talk about, at least today, with relatively less nuanced philosophical conversation. So it would be only, and somebody who is curious in the basis of these kinds of questions, that I would really get into it. So I don't know how much opposition I've gotten to those kinds of questions, besides just in my reading, right? Just in my reading of the theories of other thinkers, right? So I would say that's probably, and you can tell just by hearing me talk about this right now, that is probably the one area, or the one foundational theory that I at least feel shaky on. I'm not sure if I even understand what I'm talking about necessarily when it comes to that. I think I do, and I try to articulate, and I've got this picture in my mind, and videos like this help me to be able to articulate that further. But you can even just tell in the way I'm talking about it that I don't have a solid picture of it. And I still hold to the belief because it seems to make the most sense compared to other metaphysical pictures that I've come across. Like, I think Kant precludes a lot of the ethical conclusions that I make, or even he himself made. So, and the same thing with the sort of Hegelian idealism that came out of that and whatnot. But it's not something I've heavily developed, and I would benefit a lot more from being able to talk with somebody who themselves has kind of developed a metaphysical outlook and saying, okay, what are the great weak points? Because I have a hard time even knowing the weak points of that particular position. But anyway, I know this recording was a little bit jumbled, so I appreciate it if you got to the end here. But that's where we're gonna leave it for today.